As the fantasy football season gets closer, we all start to make our own lists of wide receivers that we think are going to break out and we want to take a chance on this year. And this is my tier list of the top 15 wide receivers this year that I do think are in for a breakout season and have the potential to do that. If you are new to the page, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Maybe like the video too if you feel the need. But I'm going to get into my top 15 breakout candidate wide receivers and explain to you guys why I think they are breakouts. Starting out with our number one breakout candidate wide receiver is Garrett Wilson, which I was kind of considering putting him at number one because he already had such a good season last year, but I think he has to be at number one, man. He still has room to break out, and let me explain why. He closed out his rookie season in the NFL amazingly, putting up a 53% target share, which is just absurd in week 18. And we do have to be somewhat realistic when talking about Garrett Wilson because he didn't have the most target competition in that wide receiver room last year, but he did put up these numbers with below average quarterback play, which is a good sign. And at the same time, he now has Aaron Rodgers, who is more than capable of supporting a good wide receiver. And on top of that, every single game he played last season without Zach Wilson as the quarterback, he averaged 17 fantasy points per game on 11 targets and 6 catches. And that would have been top 15 fantasy production over the entire season, and no Jets quarterback has over a 60% completion rating on the season. And lucky for us, Aaron Rodgers averages a 65% completion percentage on his entire career, which is just another really good sign for him. He's got a whole bunch of green lights this season, and it's all looking like he's going to break out again, so he's not easily number one on this list. But at number two on this tier list, I have Marquise Brown. He might not look like the most appealing wide receiver when you look at it, but let's go into more of his raw stats. He was the wide receiver 6 through the first 6 weeks of the season last year in a very run-heavy offense. And that was all during the time that DeAndre Hopkins was playing. In all of the games that Marquise Brown played that DeAndre Hopkins wasn't, he was a workhorse wide receiver. He averaged a 30% target share, which is very, very good. And he finished as the wide receiver 10 in all 8 of those games. But on the other hand, he was the opposite of efficient when Kyler Murray was not on the field. And granted, every time that Colt McCoy looked up to pass, it felt like he was looking DeAndre Hopkins' way. But now that DeAndre Hopkins is gone, he's the clear wide receiver 1 option for this offense. And the sooner Kyler Murray comes back is the sooner he's going to break out. But number 3, I have one of my favorite wide receivers this year is Jerry Jeudy, and let's talk about it. If you've been around my page for long enough, you know I love Jerry Jeudy's potential, and we can all say that the Broncos offense was below average, and actually it was probably the worst. They ranked pretty much last in every single offensive metric last year. But all Jerry Jeudy needs is for Russell Wilson to just not flat out suck. He averaged 11th in open rate and 16th in yards per route run. This is pretty much just pure wide receiver stats. It means he's good. But on top of this, only 70% of his targets were catchable, and this is just terrible. It essentially means that 1 out of every 3 targets was just out of his vicinity, and he couldn't even make an effort to catch it. But Russell Wilson was absolutely terrible throwing the ball downfield last season, and that is exactly where Jerry Jeudy thrives. But the good news for this is that defenses aren't going to play back because the Broncos offense is just really not much to look forward to. They run the ball a lot, and most of their passing work is in the intermediate game. And Jeudy did miss time last year. Pretty much every week he was questionable with a hamstring injury, but reports from Sean Payton have said that he looks pretty good to go and should have no setbacks at all, which is a good sign for us. I really do think any improvement in this Broncos offense, which is pretty much going to happen at this point, there's no way that they get worse, is all going to go to his production. And at number 4, a name you probably weren't expecting to hear is Elijah Moore. Give him a quarterback that's not Zach Wilson and he'll do good. And you could argue that Deshaun Watson isn't much better, but I would argue that he can't be any worse than he was last season. But Watson was thrown into this offense and he only had like 1 or 2 weeks to really practice with the team before he was allowed to come back. But Moore is definitely one of the more risky options, and let me tell you the pros and cons of this wide receiver. In the 9 games that he played in over 70% of the snaps, he only grabbed in a 13% target share and 1 yard per route run, and that is just absolutely atrocious. I don't think I've ever seen that before. But I say this to put his 10th round ADP into perspective, but it really is tough to feed through what was Zach Wilson's fault and what was his fault. And this is a really boom or bust situation you're getting into. The Browns ranked 22nd in 11 personnel usage, which means that there's really only going to be 2 wide receivers on the field at a time, and that is easily Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Now, all of this shouldn't scare you, and it kind of seems like I'm just bashing him, but I just want to tell you that he is a very boom or bust player, but whichever one that he does, he's going to excel at. But at number 5, I had to get Treylon Burks in here. The only reason I don't have him any higher is because of the Titans quarterback situations. I think Tannehill being under center is going to be his best bet for the receiving game, but I mean, I doubt that's going to happen for the entire season. But when Tannehill was the quarterback for him, he was extremely efficient. He averaged a 21% team target share and over 12 fantasy points a game. But the good news is there's absolutely zero wide receiver competition in this offense. He will easily be the wide receiver 1, but this isn't the most desirable offense, and they're really not going to throw the ball an insane amount. He was going in and out of injuries for his rookie year, but he showed flashes of the potential that he has. But he really started to ramp it up after week 10 when he came back from his injury. He averaged 6 targets per game in that stretch, and he has really been praised during OTAs. I do like him as a breakout candidate too. At number 6, I have Chris Olave, who I again would have had higher, but he just had such a good season last year. There's really not much more he can do. But again, he was really efficient last year. He was 11th in air yards and had a 25% target share, and that was with below mediocre quarterback play. But now he has a true upgrade in Derek Carr, who just helped Devontae Adams get a wide receiver 2 season last year. But on top of that, he is due for positive touchdown regression. He was one of the 3 wide receivers that had over 1,000 yards and less than 5 touchdowns last year. But these are all things I am loving about Chris Olave's situation, especially his pretty easy strength of schedule this year too. And at number 7, I have Drake London, who I'm going to start this out by saying I was really not that high on him until recently. I looked at his raw stats and he's a lot better than a lot of people are expecting. And let me explain why. He was the wide receiver 43 last season and didn't do anything flashy. I mean, Marcus Mariota was not helping him in that case. But his breakout has so much potential. He ranked 5th in target share, breaking in almost 30% of the targets last year. I mean, he was a target vacuum, but he just couldn't do much with them because the quarterback play and the offense really just sucked. He ranked 16th in open rate and had the 2nd highest yards per route run last season. And all of these stats that I'm listing off to you makes him seem like he would have been in the likes of Jalen Waddle, Amon-Ra, or Mike Evans last year. But from week 13 through week 18, he finished strong as the wide receiver 20. I mean, I've just read off a whole bunch of good stats on why he's going to break out, and this is all hidden behind his wide receiver 43 season. He's being drafted on average in the 5th round right now, and as long as the Falcons offense can just get a little bit better, that is all his potential right there. And at number 8, I have Jahan Dotson. For all of you people that know, I am a Commanders fan, but this is absolutely no bias in this ranking. He really does have a chance to break out this season. But the bottom line comes down to if Sam Howell can lead this offense effectively or not. But I really haven't seen any negative reports about Sam Howell this entire season, which is really surprising coming from a Commanders player, because I feel like we can't keep our name out of negative news for that long. He's being drafted on average in the 8th round, which is kind of hidden behind his mediocre numbers on paper, but let's look more into his counting stats. In reality, he dealt with injury pretty much for the majority of the season and had a plethora of quarterbacks he was playing with, and he had only a 15% target share and was the wide receiver 30 in that range, and that led him to a 15% target share and being the wide receiver 40 over that stretch. But in weeks 13 through 18, where he came back fully healthy, he ranked 20th in target share and had a 50% red zone target rate, which is absolutely crazy. As long as he can get somewhat consistent quarterback play from Sam Howell or Jacoby Brissett, he is going to improve easily. But again, he is more of a risky option until we figure out the real identity of this offense. And at number 9 on this breakout tier list, I have Kadarius Toney, who is a bit lower on my list than most people's, but all he needs to do is stay healthy and work his way up in the wide receiver depth chart, which really shouldn't be too hard in the Chiefs offensive wide receiver room, because I mean, they really don't have an established wide receiver core yet. He was pretty effective in his small sample size of games that he has played in his career. He's ranked 7th in target rate, but I mean, he has been pretty effective in the small sample size of the games that he has played. He's ranked 7th in targets per route run, earning a 22% team target share, and all he needs is a chance in this offense and to stay on the field, which is probably the hardest part for him. And those are 2 hard things to come by when you're drafting him with a 7th round pick. But at the same time, when you have Patrick Mahomes throwing the passes, you really can't be too upset about his breakout potential. But at number 10, I have Skyy Moore, who is kind of in the same situation as Kadarius Toney. He really didn't see much field time. He had never been on the field for more than a 50% snap share for his entire career. And people would like to say that makes him a bad, inconsistent wide receiver, which isn't entirely true. He ranked towards the middle in pretty much every wide receiver counting stat you can think of. And he didn't really do anything too eye-catching, but with the hope of him staying healthy and progressing through this offense with Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball, there really should be a chance to break out here. But again, this wide receiver room for the Chiefs is pretty much up to grabs at this point, and if he can work his way up, he's going to break out, but it really depends. Again, he's more of a risky option. Moving to our next wide receiver on this tier list is George Pickens, who, I mean, he's been getting a lot of hype this season. I mean, he's been very popular in the media with all of his spectacular catches he's made, and he's being drafted over Deontay Johnson, which is kind of crazy to me. But on top of all this hype and all this talk, he really only had 6 games last season that was startable in fantasy points. And in all of the other weeks, he finished below the wide receiver 50, and now they have Allen Robinson on the team who's going to take some targets. He might not be the wide receiver 1, but I mean, he's going to distribute some targets among this offense. And being the third or maybe even fourth option on this Kenny Pickett-led offense isn't really the most desirable situation to go to. So because of this, I do have him a bit lower on my breakout potential list, but I do think he still has the potential to do it. I mean, he showed so many flashes last year. But at number 12, I am really liking Jameson Williams. Besides the 6-game suspension and not really being on the field very much, he still has so much potential. After coming off his ACL injury, the Lions played him extremely light, and they didn't really want to put him into too much work, but you could tell when he was on the field, he was extremely electric, and he just made this offense so much better. Assuming he will come back from his 6-game suspension fully healthy in 2023, he should pick up right where he left off, ranking 13th in yards per route run. I could see him easily being the wide receiver 2 behind Amon-Ra, and has all the room in the world to exceed his 9th round ADP. Luckily, he's hiding behind his injury history and his suspension, so we can still get him pretty late in drafts. I love grabbing him at this low in the draft. But next up, I have Nico Collins, who is quietly going up in draft boards, now being taken in the 13th round, which still isn't too high. The only reason I don't have him a bit higher is because of his season-ending foot injury he suffered last season in week 13 to end his season, but it looks like he's recovering well from that, and CJ Stroud might just be targeting him the most in this offense. He is likely to be the wide receiver 1 for the Texans, and if he can build a real bond with CJ Stroud, I mean, there's no limit to his production. They've done a pretty good job building around CJ Stroud in this offense, bringing in guys like Robert Woods and Dalton Schultz to open up this offense, and they're going to help Stroud and help open up this offense for Nico Collins. Collins didn't have the most eye-catching season last year, finishing as the wide receiver 76, which really isn't appealing, but when you look at his raw stats, it is, and you could tell that he showed some signs of improvement. He averaged a respectable 7 targets a game before his injury last season, which is very good in this terrible offense that they had last year. I mean, Davis Mills was really not accurate at all throwing the ball, and I'm assuming CJ Stroud can even be better than that. I mean, it really shouldn't be that hard. Nico Collins is going to break out if he can cement himself as this wide receiver 1. And at number 14 in my breakout tier list, I have Christian Watson, who I'm not as high on as most people are this year, and let me explain why. After a pretty slow start last season, he was dealing with injuries and he was dropping a lot of passes. I'm sure you all can remember that, but it seems like people are forgetting that that happened. But after he got through that, he emerged as the clear wide receiver 1 for Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. He averaged 14th in open rate and 12th in yards per route run. The only problem here is now he has no Aaron Rodgers, who averaged a 65% completion rating last year, and he's being downgraded to Jordan Love, who I really don't trust. Jordan Love averages 9 yards per target on his career, which might seem pretty good, but when you look into the stats, they never let him throw the ball. He's never had more than 10 passing attempts on his career in a single game. But if Jordan Love can just be anything better than decent, he does have a chance to live up to his potential, but a 5th round ADP at the moment is a little bit too steep for me. But at number 15, I have Parris Campbell, who is in a pretty interesting situation here. The only reason he's in the position to break out is because the Giants wide receiver room is still undecided. Depth-wise, he is going to have to beat out a couple wide receivers, but if he can make enough noise soon enough before Wan'Dale Robinson comes back into this offense, as well as Sterling Shepard, he could cement a role. But that is the bottom line. He's going to have to really make sure he puts in a good word for himself in those first couple weeks before these wide receivers come back, because we know the Giants are not afraid to just pull any wide receiver without hesitation. We saw that with Kenny Golladay on a massive contract. They had no problem sitting him for other guys. But that is going to conclude my list of the top 15 breakout wide receivers that I do believe have a true chance to just exceed their ADP and average draft positions this year. If you did enjoy the video, please go ahead and hit that like button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.